Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
The pipeline for our most wealthy and privileged, truly privileged, and this transcends race, young kids in the country who will go on to become a good portion of our media, political, Hollywood, etc. elites. They're really in the grip of this. And the only people dissenting are the petite bourgeoisie, the $500,000 a year households, who a lot of whom earned their way to $500,000 a year or even more, probably scraped by for many years and worked hard for it. And now many of them multiracial. Their kids are some of their kids, if they look a little white, even though they're of mixed parentage or mixed racial background, are being told they're evil because they're white and they must confess their sins. Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the Publishers and Editors podcast here at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I'm your host, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined by James Pullis, executive editor of the American Mind, Matthew Peterson, vice president of education, founding editor of the American Mind, and Spencer Clavin, associate editor of both the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. Seth Barron is in the free state of Florida enjoying the week off, or part of the week off, and we will rejoin him next week or have him rejoin us next week. I wanted to open today with an editor's note that the team has been working on. Matt was just relaying his thematic response to going over the argument. But National Review, Jack Butler, I think their assignments editor, wrote a piece going after American Moment. American Moment is this new organization founded by Saurabh Sharma and run with a couple of his friends. Forgive me, guys. I'm forgetting both the names right now.
Nick Solheim.
Thank you. Spencer saved me. Nick Solheim. And then the other guy, the taller guy.
Jake.
Jake. The only reason I talk about the taller guy is because Nick Solheim posted on Twitter a wonderful picture of his grandfather in like Western getup with a big beard and a gunslinger belt around. And then he offered the praise of his grandfather for being a badass, but also said that he's also 4'10" or something like that. Anyway, not important. The American Moment organization was founded to really be among other things, a talent pool and a staffing resource for a future Republican administration, operating off the premise that there are too many young people being fed into Conservatism, Inc. and its various credentialing programs who are kind of stuck in the policies of the 90s and 2000s and thus not up to the task of dutifully enacting some post-Trump new populist nationalist policy agenda. They don't quite put it in those terms. They put it in terms of, defending American sovereignty, having an economic policy that benefits the middle class, and generally upholding the American way of life. So we're fans of their efforts. They're young guys in a hurry with an interesting advisory board, two members of which are former Claremont fellows, Rachel Bovard and Josh Hammer. Anyway, they're out there building this thing. They're out fundraising. They're all in their early 20s. I know for a fact, having talked to them and gone through some of their stuff, they're not drawing big salaries from this venture. In fact, they forewent salaries until they raised a certain amount of money. So this is born not of a desire to grift, but rather a desire to do good for their country. So Jack Butler at National Review ran it down as on two grounds, at least, one of which was this is them just trying to get into the swamp and populate the swamp with denizens of the administrative state, but are denizens of the administrative state. That's contemptible, Jack insinuated. And he also ran them down for not acknowledging Trump's defects in staffing and other things. The piece was intellectually lazy, sort of politically sloppy, and just seemed gratuitous. That was our take. Hence, we're opining on it after publishing a piece from the young gentleman who founded the American Moment, rebutting Butler's piece. So I know Matt is chomping at the bit to talk a bit about this. So you have the floor.
Well, thank you. I did a tell me what you really think about this earlier, and it went into what I really thought more than probably is the norm.
That's my job,
everyone
Matt.
has an esoteric teaching, whether they read Leo Strauss or not. But yes, I will blame Spencer for that. I think what really it does boil my blood is that it's what we've put together in this piece, and really two editors here laid the groundwork and put it together, is kind of a little bit of a retrospective on what National Review has done in the last 5 years. And, I give the benefit of the doubt to people and organizations. It's been a trying time for all. There's a lot of reasons why, there was disagreement on the right about Trump, et cetera, et cetera. National Review is a time-honored place. I don't agree that, it was just a failure all along, or, William F. Buckley was just a terrible guy. I have friends who think that. I think that there was a lot that National Review did that was amazing. But when you look at the totality of the last 5 years as an organization, okay, there's good people there, they have good intentions, there's exceptions, right? But as an organization, they have demonstrated no leadership, no coherent plan or vision of what ought to be done or what is. So if you look at it as an organization, and I talk to people who are perceptive, who read it, even its fans know it's struggling for an identity. And here's my problem with that. It's been 5 years, okay? It's been 5 years. So I can be quiet for a while, but at this point, if you don't show as an organization that you understand the moment, this American moment, and you don't know what to do in this American moment, then this American moment has passed you by. And the young guys are the captains now. And that, I think, is the real reason for this article. I'm sure that not everyone at National Review agrees with critiquing a conservative organization of young people trying to do good. We know Mark Krikorian wrote a piece defending them, or a short little blog post on NRO. But here's the thing. If you don't show that kind of leadership and you don't understand the moment, and you go back and forth and it's not clear what your position is as an organization, and then you attack people on the right who do have a sense of the moment and are doing something about it, I have a problem. And I have a problem with, I don't forget that they published Mona Sharon ripping on us for having Jack Posobiec as a Lincoln Fellow. Her argument was something like, at one point, and Posobiec says that at least Trump likes his family. And that's not right, I guess. I mean, why would you go out of your way to publish articles attacking people that really are hit pieces? They don't really have an argument. That, I think, has to stop, because they're not in a situation anymore where people are going to take that laying down. And when you think about what they have published, granted, they've published, Victor Davis Hanson. Does anyone think he actually belongs there now? I don't know. I'll just speak for myself. I don't see how Victor Davis Hanson belongs at National Review. When you look at what they have published, Kevin Williamson, I went back and read that whole piece that he wrote about poor white America, talking about their mendacity, their wickedness, and how terrible they were. When I go back and read about how people at National Review responded to Tucker Carlson's famous monologue, where he had the temerity to suggest that maybe Republicans should craft policy that helps their own voters. Maybe economics is tied to political concern and family formation. You can disagree about the substance, but the response at National Review at the time was, you know what? This isn't right. Government can't heal us. Government can't help us. And it doesn't matter. Tucker's talking about, leaders who care about people, but it doesn't matter if leaders care about people. They can't really do anything, which leads me to think that maybe this is really the problem. I mean, maybe the problem is they don't like a group like American Moment that actually wants to staff up the DC with leaders from outside of DC, right? The great thing about American Moment is they want to find people outside the system who didn't necessarily go to fancy schools, who aren't necessarily politically connected, but do have talent. Give them new ideas about policy and put them into power. And maybe National Review just thinks, well, there's nothing that can be done. We just sit on, we sit on our haunches and we complain about how normal people just need to get their act together and do better. And everything that's happened is just their fault. There's just nothing that can be done. And if that's the case, get out of the way, right? Let other people lead, because this is the anti-politics of principled loserdom. And I'm done with it. I'm sick of it. I'm done with it. We need to start naming names and just say, look, this is ridiculous. And how dare you attack these guys for actually doing what, in fact, you and other organizations have failed to do. Now, they may fail themselves, but God bless them for at least trying.
They're behaving toward National Review, rather, or not, is again, as you say, it's not even National Review at large, much as Conservative Inc., as represented in the pages of National Review, are behaving toward these young guys the way that you would behave toward the woke left. That is, as a hostile entity whose whole project needs to be dismantled. And so any chink that we can pick at in their armor, any accusation we can make against them in good or bad faith, we're going to raise in the attempt to hamstring them in an effort to dismantle their project. This is not the kind of criticism that comes sort of from a well-meaning, constructive ally on the same side who wants to see you achieve your goals, but thinks that you maybe could reconsider a couple of your policy points. That sort of internal, circling the wagons, thinking about how to best achieve our mutual common goals. The right welcomes that, of course, it always has. But the idea that you would instead see the beginnings of this exciting new endeavor, and rather than send them a brief email to say, hey, have you considered X, Y, and Z, just attack them in public on the most flimsy possible grounds, right? That speaks something else. That is not about trying to help out a fellow traveler. That is about trying to take down an organization that you see as a threat. Why? Because their very existence is an implicit rebuke to your failures. It's your guilty conscience. It's the guilty conscience of the people who have time and again proven inadequate to the challenges of the moment, time and again failed to actually help the people that they're supposed to be representing and defending, namely Americans, right? In the middle of the country, of all stripes, in the middle class, right? Time and again, the policies of neoconservatism have failed these people. And the American moment doesn't even particularly come for them in any big explicit way. It's not as if they're out here banging the drum, beating, grinding their axe to come for the heads of National Review. No, the National Review is coming for their heads because they know that if anybody can succeed at what American Moment proposes to do, then it will fly in the face of all their protestations of impossibility, all of their laziness, all of their failures to achieve their goals, the goals that they've set out for these many years. It's just kind of disgusting.
Just real quick. I'm glad you mentioned the woke left, because we mentioned that in the editor's note. And, as we point out, guess who these people sound like? When you blame poor white America for all their problems, all the evils that happen, government intervention can't solve them. All you deserve, you people who call yourself Christians, as David French would love to say, you people are all the problem. And who does that sound like? That sounds exactly like the woke left. It is exactly the argument they make. And it's disgusting to see that coming from the right. And this kind of blame game and this kind of moral scolding. And it's as if that's what they think politics is. It's just about words and telling people they need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, and they don't have any other ideas. But it sounds in accusation and the blame game, especially against poor white America and Trump's base, sounds very much just like the woke left. And I think people need to wake up and realize when this is coming from your own side, you need to stop listening to those people and hold those organizations who are willing to publish that crap accountable.
Yeah, you can't serve the role of a gatekeeper if no one's coming to your gate. And this is the problem that they're going to be facing, is if you're a young, ambitious, patriotic American and you want to get involved in politics somehow, do you want to wait in line for admission into a writerly cadre that will have things to say much of the time, but do nothing? Or do you want to roll the dice on a bold new venture with a handful of guys who are like you? I mean, I think it's clear how young people are starting to recalibrate the making of decisions like that. And it's not like it was even 10 years ago where, you graduate and then you become sort of like a public facing person, young person of letters, and hope that your blog gets acquired by the Washington Post or that you become New York Times columnist. I mean, these things used to be iconic and they're not anymore. And the media institutions themselves have brought this upon themselves. There's the same sort of forces at work that are putting magazines like National Review into this predicament, are causing the New York Times to punch itself repeatedly in the face and lose subscribers and lose its mystique. There was a time when the number one job of a reporter was to not become the story. And now you can't make it through the day without encountering another story about another reporter. And the media people who think that they can continue to throttle the culture as they wish are going to be in for even more hurt than they're in already. And they seem so reluctant to adjust that they're merely encouraging the same kind of active new projects that they then turn around and critique.
You can tell from the way they behave and the way they present these criticisms, James, that what you're saying is true. Look, there are so many hours in the day. There's so many words that you can produce, even as a jobbing writer. Let's imagine you have no other responsibilities than to like pump out think pieces. You can only, you pick your subjects and you decide how you're going to present your arguments and to whom and in what fora. And, so when you go out of your way to write a hit piece in public about this bold new venture, or when you are the New York Times and you go out of your way to present Clubhouse as some grave threat to American democracy, or when you're at a university and homeschooling suddenly becomes popular and you go out of your way to publish a study about all the terrible, evil, nasty, backwards, ugly people who do homeschooling, right? That is a choice. That is not like, oh, there were so many news items on the floor today and I just covered all of them in my like pure egalitarianism, in the open neutrality of my like pure forum. No, you said today, like, what's the thing that I want to use my platform for? And you decided that what you wanted was to buy yourself one more day, like one more inch of space where you are not the crumbling, desiccated husk of a loser that you actually are turning out to be. And so the way that you do that is just like, anybody that is coming in with some young blood, anybody that is coming in with like any sort of fresh approach to the thing that you failed at is the person that you choose in this moment to like besmirch and slander in the public square. And yeah, it's absolutely not just this American moment thing. It is how all of our institutions, which are currently being outstripped by the rapid pace of the digital revolution, is how all of them are reacting to their rapid obsolescence.
Yeah. And I just can't let this go. I have to just add, these guys, I think, really are the antidote. So what James and Spencer are saying, I mean, these guys understand it. Because they're young. I mean, Sharma, the president he calls me a boomer, right? Which I have to admit is probably the only accusation that does anger me. But I'm okay if he does it because I respect what he's trying to do, even if I give him a lot of crap back. These people are friends. And when you look at what they're trying to do, they understand that the solution is very much along the lines James laid out. James laid out the problem. The solution is not more people who are tied into the system, who go become writers and make their arguments in conservative publications and think tanks, and then they go into policy and government. The solution is finding a bunch of people who actually do know what time it is, who have experience outside the system, who are young, who are talented, who work in tech, who work in finance, and who also, yes, work in politics, but are actually, practical, oriented towards actually leading in some way, managing a movement and moving things forward. They understand that, and they're actively seeking those people. So, I'll compare them to other things that are good out there that have lots of college students involved and young people involved, but they're not doing the more serious work that American Moment is doing. And here's what really ticks me off. There are still all kinds of people at National Review and out there in these old legacy institutions who don't think that the new agenda for Trump or the new right is coherent. What's your agenda? What are you going to do? There isn't one. These guys are trying to answer that question. And here's the terrible things they want to do. They have a nice list of 10 priorities on their website at americanmoment.org. I'm even going to shill for them. Their priorities are as follows. Listen to these terrible things. The first one goes like this. The American family, rooted in faith and tradition, is the bedrock of this nation and must be supported. Well, I'm literally shaking right now. I mean, that sounds terrible. 2, law and order are essential to national prosperity and cohesion. Wow, listen to this new right. Sounds very conservative. Immigration must be restricted to promote national solidarity and the economic well-being of all Americans. Wow, that doesn't sound like the Wall Street Journal, but it sounds like the desires and wishes of the vast majority of people who vote for Republican politicians. U.S. foreign policy, specifically the use of the military, must be restrained and oriented toward the national interest. That sounds terrible. I mean, how could we have that goal? China and the elites who enabled its rise are generational threats to American prosperity. It's almost like they realize what's going on in the world Trade policy must promote middle-class jobs, American industry, and national security. That's insane. How can we let that happen? Technological advancement is crucial to national prosperity. Oh, those young radicals. The power of multinational corporations must be curtailed. Oh, how could they say so? My principles are being violated right now. Government has a moral responsibility to foster public virtue. Well, that sounds like, wow,
that's fascism,
Western sentiment for millennia. That will scare some people on the right because they think it's going to lead to government tyranny. And I mean, we wouldn't want government tyranny to appear out of nowhere. I mean, we're so free right now. And the last one is every American has the right to equal treatment under the law, as opposed to the wokeness, which of course wants to establish, a racial and identity hierarchy. So these are the principles that these young people have laid out. There's 10 of them. And then they have publications and policy, that's wrapped around each of those, what they're trying to promote and how to hash it out. And the thing that bothers me the most is this critique. Well, there's not a coherent agenda. I just laid out a coherent agenda. We all basically agree with it here, I think. Well, what are the actual details of that? Well, we have to hash that out. But you know why we have to hash it out? Because for 20 years, other people failed to establish firm policies that abide by these principles. And that's why Trump happened. And that's why the Republican Party is in disarray. So God forbid we let people try to solve that problem. So if you're listening to this, I mean, I would check out the American Moment and support those guys.
Let me also just add that, we are conscious of the fact that we are editors making these claims and making these criticisms. We are editors of a publication, in some cases, 2 publications. And every day we get up and we ask each other and we ask ourselves, how can we actually deliver to our audience something useful, something that reinforces for them the reality of the situation that we're in, something that gives them guidance as to what to do about the situation that we're in. Not trying to gatekeep, not trying to tone police, not trying to appease business interests or whatever else you may see on the internet coming out of various publications. I mean, we know that this is a media space where you gotta reward the people who fund you, you gotta reward the people who read, you gotta reward your, it can be a very political business, the media business. But the reality is, we know what bad content is too. And we know how annoying it is to have to sift through it. And we know how much useless stuff is that's out there, or stuff that even wants to be good and is trying hard, but it just doesn't, what has it done for me lately? How does it help you come to grips with what's going on and formulate a plan for yourself and those around you to do something about it? And that gulf between kinds of content streams that provide that and content streams that don't, it's getting wider and wider. And audiences know what is becoming a waste of their time, driving toward value 0 or even negative value. And they know it's different because it's not just more idle talk on the internet. It's stuff that can actually help them do what they want with the people they love and trust and are building their culture together with.
Yeah, well said from all. As Matt said, keep an eye on American Moment. They're young guys in a hurry and doing good work and growing. I wanted to say just one good word, and there are good words to say about National Review. One thing they still do quite well is sift through legislative bills that are 1,000 pages or so long, so you don't have to. I just wanted to raise quickly some highlights from the what House Democrats have called the For the People Act, which is called it's also HR 1. Which is this bill about voting going forward. I'm just going to read a bit from National Review's summary from the editors, and then we can discuss a little bit. I'll just riff a bit editorially. The thing is being billed as, more access to voting, expansion of the franchise, lowering barriers to voting. This is all good. And a small d democracy, of course, we want more democracy, which means the more voting, the better. Just some highlights. HR 1 mandates that states provide same-day registration and allow people to change their name and address on the rolls at the polling place on Election Day, then forbids states from treating their votes as provisional ballots that can be checked later. It mandates online registration without adequate safeguards against hackers. It mandates automated registration of people who apply for unemployment, Medicaid, Obamacare, and college, or who are coming out of prison. The bill's authors expect this to register non-citizens. They create a safe harbor against prosecution of non-citizens who report that they've been erroneously registered. The bill bars states from checking with other states for duplicate registrations within 6 months of an election. It bars removing former voters from the rolls for failure to vote or to respond to mailings. Outside election observers are an important check on the system. H.R. 1 bars anyone but an election official from challenging a voter's eligibility to vote on Election Day, thus insulating Democrat-run precincts from scrutiny. We should say by implication it would insulate Republican-run precincts too, but both would be bad. State voter ID laws are banned, replaced by simply a sworn voter statement. The dramatic expansion of mail-in voting during the COVID pandemic is enshrined permanently in federal law. We've been talking about that off and on for a couple months now. States are banned from the most elementary security methods for mail-in ballots. They must provide a ballot to everyone without asking for identification and may not require notarization or a witness to signatures. States are compelled to permit ballot harvesting so long as the harvesters are not paid per ballot. Curbside voting, ballot drop boxes, and 15 days of early voting are mandated nationwide, and the bill micromanages the location and hours of polling stations, early voting locations, and drop boxes. Finally, last paragraph of my excerpt, states are compelled to accept voter registrations from 16-year-olds, although they still cannot vote before turning 18. An amendment to mandate that, too, was defeated. Democrats and their political allies who rely on the youth vote traditionally expend extensive resources registering young people. The bill shifts the job of signing up young voters to the federal government, which will pay to teach 12th graders how to register, create a, quote, campus vote coordinator position on college campuses, and award grants to colleges for, quote, demonstrated excellence in registering students to vote. This is measured in part by whether campuses provide rides to get students to the polls and whether they encourage both students and the communities around the campus to get mobilized to vote, quote unquote. So, this, of course, is being pitched as all good. Of course, it's just expanding the franchise. I think at the base of it is to reject the age-old wisdom of republicanism, smaller republicanism in the modern era, both in America and elsewhere. The wisdom of that long practice is that voting as such, while it's good, is not the only good. And you ought to structure your democracy or your republic in such a way as to produce decent policies rather than mob rule. And at some point, if you erode all of the checks on the attempts to validate voting and make it legitimate and make sure that only the people who not ought to vote, but who legally should vote can vote. And, it's not a demerit to make voting somewhat difficult. Voting as such has nothing to do with good government. It's a means to good government. It's a means to the common good. It's a means to the promotion of public happiness. What this looks like to us and is far from just the mere expansion of democracy, but rather the instantiation of basically blue rule forever with massive, massive incentives for voter manipulation and voter fraud. And from the left, whenever you say any of that, Jonathan Chait just wrote a piece about denouncing Mike Pence for a pretty anodyne op-ed he wrote in his new position at the Heritage Foundation, decrying H.R. 1. Chait basically says he's, Pence is an aspiring authoritarian and wants to bring fascism to America, more or less. But really what Pence is arguing for, and I think what we would argue for, is having voting serve good government rather than serve the ruling class's attempts by hook or by crook to enable themselves to have the widest opportunity for voter manipulation and voter fraud, with their excuse being the more people that vote, the better. The thing's an abomination.
The argument or the attack that you'll get when you say that this is an absurd move is that you are don't you want black people to vote? Don't you want poor people to vote? Don't you want minorities to be able to vote? And of course, nobody is against any of those things. Nobody's against American citizens who are any of those things casting a ballot. But of course, the functional implication of this bill is that Americans are not individuated beings, are not people who may or may not wish to cast a vote in any given election, but are simply pieces on a chessboard to be shipped by the truckload to the polling station of the Democrats' choice. Because in fact, votes do not, mere numbers of votes do not equal democracy. And they certainly don't equal representative government. Representative government equals the dense and carefully sewn fabric of personal interaction on the daily in your local community with all sorts of forms of communal life, with your school board, with your city council, with your state government and legislature. None of this is measured in terms of just like how many bodies can we stuff into one polling station. I mean, in point of fact, this is just, treating people like cattle and reducing our incredibly complex and sophisticated system to like a giant bucket of deplorables and non-deplorables that like ultimately will tilt the scales in the direction that we want. That fabric of civic engagement is completely destroyed in America, in large part because of this mentality that like all you have to do is just like run to the ballot booth and cast your chip for the person we tell you to, like on the day, and then like seal clap and run away. Like the whole premise of this is that what we are not, the last thing they want us to be is a gathering together of individuated citizens, each one with a specific role that we choose and decide upon, as opposed to just like, I don't know, yet another number in the, endless ream of Democrat voter rolls.
Well, this is clearly just the first step down a road that no one has any confusion about where this road leads. It's just a dispute over whether it's good or bad. One side wants plebiscitary democracy, and the other wants a Republican form of government. And if this goes through and this becomes the law, then you're going to get still more bills and more quote unquote reforms coming down the pike because they don't like local government. They don't trust it. They don't trust people to organize politically at that level and govern themselves. And if the attempt to rebut their argument with reference to local government will lead to some kind of reassurance like, well, of course we like local politics. That's why every school is going to be used as an indoctrination center, and where every community is going to have this sort of appointed set of cronies who dole out patronage and participate in self-dealing and, make sure that everyone is brainwashed in exactly the same way. Of course we care about local politics. And this is just a culture clash. I mean, the culture war isn't over one war. There are now two cultures that are fighting. They have a fundamentally different view of the good. They have a fundamentally different view of what regime is the best regime. And one side is currently more animated in their attempts to make it happen. They're not going to get bored. They're not going to get tired. They're going to keep going. Why would they stop? That's contrary to the American spirit, even to just like gain some initial victories and then your movement kind of peters out. No. So, if you want any hope of restoring or preserving a Republican form of government that's not just in name only, there just has to be more energy. There has to be more energy to prevent these things and to build up the kind of cultural and socioeconomic resources and organizations parallel to the ones that we have, so that if we are pushed further down this road, the fabric of ordinary life is not washed away with it.
Yeah, sure is something. For now, it doesn't look like it'll pass the Senate, but we're in a brave new world where cowardice runs rampant, and we have a very narrow Democratic majority in the Senate, so I would expect a massive pressure campaign to be brought to bear against any Democratic holdouts. But I think even this would be a bridge too far. But we shouldn't be surprised by any new extreme fusion of our politics these days. I wanted to talk about this interesting Bari Weiss piece in City Journal called "The Miseducation of America's Elites." She opens the piece by saying, "I was invited to," well, she talks about pseudonymous Zoom meetings with no cameras on between parents at Harvard Westlake in West Los Angeles in the Hollywood Hills, a very Tony prep school of long pedigree and with fabulous amounts of money. It's a beautiful campus. Among other things, they're building a $40 million offsite athletic facility. They have plenty of athletic facilities on site. You can look at the overhead Google picture, pool, tennis courts, huge, immaculate multi-purpose grass field, and then beautiful terracotta roofed Italian style campus. It's classic prep school, Southern California style. Anyway, she opens it with this discussion of these Zoom calls, and then she says, I was invited to a backyard meeting with these concerned parents who, they're shelling out $46K a year for their kids' private school. In most of the normal America, they'd be considered at the very least very upper middle class, if not, the 1%. And they technically are the 1%, but the concerned parents are mostly not the hyper wealthy at these places. They're the ones who, make the lowly sum in Hollywood, Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, Beverly Hills, the lowly sum, household sum of, $500,000-600,000, which, you send your kid to expensive school and you have your mortgage that's $8,000 a month, and, the lifestyle creep is high. We don't need to take pity on them for all that. I just mean they're kind of they're not quite the working class version of parents at this school's clientele, but they're close. Anyway, I just want to read some representative excerpts from this because it's pretty revealing. As our listeners probably know, the leitmotif here is the rise of anti-racism and the really aggressive push post George Floyd to really insinuate this in schools in a way that is deep and ineradicable and pretty radical. So here we go. For most parents, the demonization of capitalism is the least of it. They say that their children tell them they're afraid to speak up in class. Most of all, they worry that the school's new plan to become an anti-racist institution, unveiled this July in a 20-page document, which you all can look up, is making their kids fixate on race and attach importance to it in ways that strike them as grotesque. I grew up in LA, and the Harvard school definitely struggled with diversity issues. The stories some have expressed since the summer seem totally legitimate, says one of the fathers. He says he doesn't have a problem with the school making greater efforts to redress past wrongs, including by bringing more minority voices into the curriculum. What he has a problem with is a movement that tells his children that America is a bad country and that they bear collective racial guilt. They are making my son feel like a racist because of the pigmentation of his skin, one mother says. Another poses a question to the group. How does focusing a spotlight on race fix how kids talk to one another? A few paragraphs later, the parents in the backyard say that for every one of them, there are many more, too afraid to speak up. I've talked to at least 5 couples who say, I get it, I think the way you do. I just don't want the controversy right now, related one mother. They are all eager for their story to be told, but not a single one would let me use their name. They worry about losing their jobs or hurting their children if their opposition to this ideology were known. The school can ask you to leave for any reason, said one mother at Brentwood, another one of these schools in West LA, another Los Angeles prep school. Then you'll be blacklisted from all the private schools and you'll be known as a racist, which is worse than being called a murderer. That fear is shared deeply by the children. For them, it's not just the fear of getting a bad grade or getting turned down for a college recommendation, though that fear is potent. It's the fear of social shaming. If you publish my name, it would ruin my life. People would attack me for even questioning this ideology. I don't even want people knowing I'm a capitalist, a student said at the Fieldston School in New York City. We've jumped coast now. In a comment echoed by other students Miss Weiss spoke with. Fieldston declined to comment for this article. The kids are scared of other kids, says one Harvard Westlake mother. We're almost done here, but it's good stuff. The colleges want children, customers, that are going to be pre-aligned to certain ideologies that originally came out of those colleges, says a STEM teacher at one of New York's prestigious prep schools. I call it woke weaning, and that's the product schools like mine are offering. And I'll just wrap with this. A few paragraphs here. I'm in a cult. Well, that's not exactly right. It's that the cult is all around me and I'm trying to save kids from becoming members. He sounds like a Scientology defector, but he is a math teacher at one of the most elite high schools in New York City. He's not a political conservative. I studied critical theory. I saw Derrida speak when I was in college, he says. So when this ideology arrived at our school over the past few years, I recognized the language and I knew that what it was. But it was in a mutated form. This teacher is talking with me because he is alarmed by the toll of this ideology is taking on his students. I started seeing what was happening to the kids, and that's what I couldn't take. They are being educated in resentment and fear. It's extremely dangerous. 3,000 miles away in Los Angeles, another prep school teacher says something similar. It teaches people who have so much to see themselves as victims. They think they are suffering oppression at one of the poshest schools in the country. It seems to be working. One Los Angeles mother tells me that her son was recently told by his friend, who is black, that he is inherently oppressed. She was incredulous. This kid is a multimillionaire, she said. My son said to his friend, explain it to me. Why do you feel oppressed? What has anyone done to make you feel less? And the friend said, the color of my skin. This blew my mind. I encourage everyone to read it. The Miseducation of America's Elites at City Journal from Bari Weiss. Essential reporting. I mean, nothing new for those of us who have been tracking this sort of thing. But the nexus between the prep schools and the elite Ivy schools is, you know, sort of a self-reinforcing thing. And it just means that the pipeline for our most wealthy and privileged, truly privileged, and this transcends race, young kids in the country who will go on to become a good portion of our media, political, Hollywood, et cetera, elites. They're really in the grip of this. And the only people dissenting are the, you know, the kind of the petite bourgeoisie, the $500,000 a year households who, you know, a lot of whom earned their way to $500,000 a year or even more, probably, you know, scrape by for many years and worked hard for it. And now many of them multiracial, you know, some of their kids, if they look a little white, even though they're of mixed parentage or mixed racial background, are being told they're evil because they're white and they must confess their sins and apologize for their privilege. This is just beginning to penetrate, I think, in normal America, starting in normal elite America, and there is such a thing. And so we ought to encourage the outrage and provide ways for people to speak out. But it's in many ways still an intractable problem, especially for folks who realize rightly that the prosperity of their children and their social standing in their community, which are important things, are, you know, really can't allow them to dissent at all. It's frightening.
Yeah, what's becoming unnerving is that this is not just the hallmark of a sort of out of control ideology or a collective delusion that's sweeping through like a craze. I mean, what we're seeing are hallmarks of obsolescing institutions, you know, of schools where probably a good number of parents are respected members of consulting firms and other sort of, you know, international layer businesses that currently project about 40% unemployment or higher over the next, you know, 10 to 20 years due to automation. Our institutions, our educational institutions, are not prepared to do anything with the children that are being fed to them, especially for such high prices. And the speed and the seriousness with which woke religion has sunken into the bones of our educational institutions suggests that deep down, the people leading those institutions really can't figure out what the hell their purpose is supposed to be in a world where technology pushes us to mass unemployment, UBIs, people living in the pod, the whole thing. They don't know what to do. They're losing faith that the things that they have to teach are worth knowing or worth learning. And into that void fills something that makes such a total claim on your conscience that it's that much more difficult in the minds of its adopters to consign to the scrap heap of history. You know, after the jobs apocalypse sets in, and after everyone's just kind of sitting around trying to figure out what to do with themselves because our robot slaves do everything, they're going to need a religion. They're going to need something to keep them busy. And that is why wokeness is catching on. And that's something that, you know, this is why we need new educational institutions, because at a certain point, you don't have the time to try to unscrew an institution that isn't capable of moving into the world that we're in.
Yeah, and one that's that's very well funded by its patrons. I mentioned that these parents in question are not at the top of the heap of the kids who go there. You know, mentioned in the article are the Will Ferrells and his wife of the Harvard Westlake community who give $100,000 a year. I was joking before we started this podcast. That's pretty cheap for Will Ferrell, but you know, the top echelon of donors of the sort of super elite at schools like these are well, materially, I have no reason to question any of this because as long as they toe the line, they'll continue to make 7 and 8 figures a year. And then also, you know, for sort of shallow reasons, are just bought into it as the latest thing that one needs to say to be au courant with social justice norms.
I mean, one reason why this piece broke my heart, there's a million lines in it where you just kind of hold your breath. But, like I grew up among these people. Like I was raised in a relatively wealthy California suburb. I knew plenty of kids that went to Harvard Westlake. They were lovely, charming people. I knew their moms and hung out at their houses, and like they, gave me Capri Suns after school, and just all of that, that whole world is completely familiar to me. I could see it in my mind's eye as it's described in the piece. And this is a hostage situation. I mean, it's completely believable to me that these very, very nice people who just kind of believe in their niceness, who believe in being nice sort of as like the virtue par excellence, the only non-outdated virtue in these communities is to just be really, really sweet to everybody and treat everybody the same. And, and that guy that says, like, I studied Foucault in college and now suddenly it's come back to take over my life and to insinuate itself into the mind of my child in this hideously mutated way. Like, of course, like many of these folks are reaping what they have sown by just kind of nodding along and doing whatever they need to do to get by. And there's a certain like strain of commentary on this piece that just says like, well, you made your bed, now lie in it. And I don't know, I suppose that there's really there's no other option at this point. And many of these institutions may simply be left for, as kind of like carrion to be devoured by the woke vultures. But at the same time, I sense a desperation in it that I think James speaks deeply to the real anxieties of just like total crack up and failure of our sort of nice, comfortable suburban lives. And like, I'm not even sure that in the end, these folks are gonna like, I suppose that these folks are going to be fine in the short term. Like there's going to be this sort of comfortable enclave that they live in where the riots sort of like pass by their backyard, except that everything else that would make a life meaningful, like what you would pass on to your children and the society in which you take pride, is simply going to crumble around them. Maybe they will simply reap what they sow, but I don't know. I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I think this is a great podcast, I have to say, and I hate podcasts, and I'm always very like, oh, I have to do this podcast, and even this one, I don't particularly get, but okay, this is great. Why? Because this is
What's
real.
your point, Matt?
No, my point is that was a very honest assessment, and I think a very real assessment of what's going on, and so. Let me recalibrate some things I said earlier. Like the class dynamics, for instance, at National Review is that, David French, who's not there anymore, and those kinds of people, they aspire to be the kind of nice people who live, who send their kids to Westlake, who are still on salary. For most of America, they're certainly wealthy. They like to call themselves upper middle class, right? Most people would say, wow, you're really rich. But, in their world, they're the ones who are still have to pull in money and have generally, as Ryan suggests, earned their way up. And we have to say, this is a group of people who they are very competent. They are actually very affable. They are actually very nice. They're generally not the people who are crazy ideologues or whatever. And this is actually a truth that the right needs to grapple with. These are people who generally stay married, right? They do a lot for their kids. They care about their families. But the problem is I'm getting a request for a Zoom call from someone I don't even know.
Weird.
Okay. So you have, I think what Spencer just laid out is very real. And there's a certain, the hostage metaphor you used is kind of true. There's a certain way, though, when you move your way up in the kind of institutions that James described that are dependent upon global realities that are changing, what you're hostage to are the masters of the world, right? Mm. And so these are people also who are they understand very well because their livelihood is tied to what the overlords want. They're closer to the overlords than most people. So most people listening to this podcast, like, these are people who, they're highly competent. They're actually, they're very good at what they do. They got there for a reason. And a lot of them are, people you would actually go, they're not so bad. But their livelihood is tied to the real overlords who are running things. The people who, as Ryan said, really could donate a lot of money and are not just actors, even though, man, you mentioned could donate more. Like the real overlords are people who are in hundreds of millions of dollars territory, and they're the ones calling the shots. So these people are in a way beholden to them. And I think what's interesting is this is the human dynamic. There's a lot of midwits and smarter people who've talked about this. An extreme group of people that's determined can run roughshod over a majority of nice people any day of the week. And the principle of democracy, which most people in listening and all of us are used to, is that, well, the majority rules. Well, the problem is the majority doesn't rule when there's a group of ideologues who are really committed and everyone's super nice and they push and they push and they push. And the crazy ideologues are the ones supported by the overlords. And so you have these very nice people. And I look at it as, yeah, they'll probably be okay for a while. But I mean, gosh, I was reading today another City Journal piece. We like City Journal by Chris Rufo, our friend and Claremont fellow, about what California is proposing in its ethnic studies curriculum, which is literally, as they say, worship or chants, social justice chants to Aztec gods, including the god of human sacrifice, for the sake of counter-genocide against white Christians because they were genocidal against the Aztec peoples and the indigenous peoples. This is actually a thing that they are proposing in California schools. And so that's one example, right, of the extreme. And you think about that and that going on, right, in all the public school system, far removed from people who send their kids to Westlake and live on the West Side in Malibu, whatever. I mean, where do they think this is going? And this has happened over and over again in human history. Those nice, competent people, if they don't band together and stand up and are kind of corralled by the overlords and bullied into this, and they can't speak out because they'll lose their livelihood, they're actually the ones who, some of them will just, kowtow to the man the rest of their lives and be okay. But they're actually the ones who, when the shit hits the fan and California collapses, like, guess who's going to pay the burden, right? Guess who's going to pay the cost in any kind of actual revolution? And if you're, I'm being somewhat facetious, but also serious. Like, if you're teaching kids to worship demons who are about human sacrifice and tribalize themselves for the sake of counter-genocide against white people, and you're going to do that with the authority of the state and public schools, like, eventually it might not be such a nice world in the West Side. Like, those people might look over to the West Side in LA and look up in the hills and say, well, I guess it's pretty clear what we should do now. And even if that doesn't happen in some physical revolutionary way, which we shouldn't discount, it's not going to be good for a lot of these folks. And in a way, they're going to be kind of beleaguered. I did everything right. I don't understand, like, what's going on. I'm a good person. I'm not racist. Why is this happening to me? And they're often the ones who become casualties of war, shall we say.
Yeah, they're remarkably unacquainted with the history of revolutionary Marxists of whatever flavor movements. I mean, you sort of, also in the article there's some dad in New York who said he broached the topic with another friend of his and said, to what extent can we question this ideology? And he said, oh, dude, you're on dangerous ground there in our friendship. I know where these conversations go. And basically he meant, like, look, if you're even going to raise this, maybe we can't be friends because I know what happens to people who raise this. And, people just, I don't want to get into controversy, right? And then they're going to wonder why their kids are arguing they should go to the camps. I just wanted to close this part of the cast with this. I didn't bring it up in one of my quotes, but one of the teachers mentioned that there was a handout in one of the classes, I think at Harvard Westlake, called the Pyramid of White Supremacy. Now, envision a pyramid, and, the bottom has a section, and then the next section up is another section. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. And then it ends at the top. At the top is genocide. But at the bottom is indifference. And I just want to, they have some examples in quotes in each of these sections. And I just wanted to list a few of them because it's pretty revealing. Indifference, in the section indifference, which, this is the base of white supremacy. And their premise of the exercise is if you remove the blocks from the bottom, it will all crumble down. So really, the most important thing is to attack the most benign stuff here, according to normal people, not according to this pyramid. So in indifference, things like politics doesn't affect me, avoiding confrontation with racist family members, two sides to every story, not challenging racist jokes, not believing experiences of people of color, prioritizing intentions over impact. Next section up is minimization. Post-racial society, that's not accepted. Why can't we all just get along? It doesn't matter who you vote for. We all belong to the human race. That's not acceptable. Next section is veiled racism, English-only initiatives, bootstrap theory, claiming reverse racism, and Eurocentric curriculum. Next section is discrimination. This is a nod to James's point about how H.R. 1, the voting law that the Democrats want to pass, is basically hostile to local government because it's outside control. In the discrimination section, the things that shouldn't be tolerated are funding schools locally, anti-immigration policies, school-to-prison pipeline, whatever that means. I mean, we know what it means, but just to list it sort of opens more questions than it answers. Stop and frisk. And then, the really bad sections, calls for violence, and genocide. So this is what the kind of thing that's being taught. It won't end well, as we say. So we wanted to finish up with some lighter hearted stuff, although still kind of along the same lines, or at least adjacent. So everyone knows what QAnon is. Jake says we have 5 minutes, but so we'll do this with some brisk treatment. Everyone knows what QAnon is. It's the sort of always shifting theory that that the U.S. government is run by pedophiles, and Trump was on the verge of overturning it all. And everything from the true inauguration is the old one, which was March 4th. So something was going to happen, and Trump was going to take the reins back and fix it all. The newest QAnon theorists say that was a false flag operation. It's actually March 20th. The left, meanwhile, uses all of this without much evidence of actual radicalism or any truly armed factions going to the Capitol, or to basically extend so far indefinitely with 2 and 3 month extensions, the more or less permanent occupation of the nation's capital with razor wire and troops, which is kind of ridiculous. That's QAnon. So the right's getting a little better at this. They started pushing back with basically the retort, oh, well, you think conspiracy theories are bad? Okay. What about blue checkmark Twitter that pushed a Russian election conspiracy hoax, a Russiagate hoax for months and months, and among other things. And they started calling that Blueanon as a riposte with a nod to QAnon. And, of course, the left does not like to be mocked, and official social media commissars don't like to be, had in this way. Blueanon was catching on and causing some consternation. So somebody noticed that at urbandictionary.com, which tracks a lot of this sort of jargon of originally sort of urban culture, but now increasingly online culture, Blueanon was removed by Urban Dictionary. The first instance, many people remarked of them seeing anything being removed. A hue and cry was raised, and then Blueanon was reinstated. And it's just the latest example of the double standard in digital land, which is to say, if you're right wing and having some real effect, whether you're spreading quote unquote conspiracy theories or otherwise being pretty effective in puncturing leftist narratives, you're somehow a threat to democracy and spreading misinformation. Whereas if the right starts using memes and nicknames to good effect, they'll meet the algorithmic, personal, and otherwise censors, and the attempt by respectable opinion on the left, whether it be in the form of tech companies or just sort of talking heads in our media complex of, canceling you and shunning you from public life and decreasing the effectiveness of your attempt to poke fun at them and expose their corruption and hypocrisy.
Yeah, I thought this little meme campaign, super straight, and Blue Anon. I mean, it's all sort of genius.
Could you explain super straight real quick, Matt, just for our less online listeners?
Yeah, I mean, someone should dig out and just read the original tweet, but it's a movement that has a flag with colors, and it's a group of people who are only attracted to cisgender opposite sex individuals. Very rare thing in the human beings, but so it's a guy who's only attracted to a woman, and it's a unique identity, really. And being super straight makes you part of the LGBT community, and super straight individuals deserve protection and respect, and they've been fighting for their rights on Twitter.
Yeah.
And this drove people nuts. And Blue Anon, of course, the way Posobiec uses this is hilarious to me. I mean, Blue Anon as well. And I mean, these are the kinds of what I love about it is there's a certain like free for all rebellion, right? Where these are people who are in a way instinctively responding to the environment with a kind of sense of of where the pinpoint attack needs to be. And there's a certain vitality to it. I mean, the way in which the joy with which these memes spread, it's very much like the NPC meme, which was a huge threat, right? Twitter took down tons of accounts, lest we forget, because there were fake accounts, there were NPCs, non-playable characters in video games who were being likened onto the left. And these sorts of things cause them damage, so you can see the response. What I love about it is very much like the Wall Street bets. It means the spirit of F you, I won't do what you tell me. And in fact, I'm using your logic against you, but not in a boomer way, and not in the Democrats, the real racists, or this kind of way. They're just saying, okay, let's take your logic and play with it. And the problem is older people don't understand the left's logic. These guys do. And what they're doing is brilliant. It's effective. And I'll tell you, if you're a savvy observer of the scene, one of the most effective things, I think Dave Raboy, if you follow Dave Raboy, another one of our friends, you'd understand this. One of the most effective things to do right now is simply to report what's going on online and explain to people. It's not original reporting, but report these kinds of movements that are interesting and that show life. And so if you're savvy trying to figure out the scene, you really need someone to tell you, about Wall Street bets and these various movements before they happen or as they're going. So not the Bee, right? The Babylon Bee, which has beaten the onion and also understands the rhetorical environment better than everybody. They have something called Not the Bee, which is really a news service reporting on what's already going on. So it's not original reportage. They have a great article just explaining to people what's going on with super straight. There's also super anti-racism, which comes over the top and reverses that logic as well. And Blue Anon. And, this is the kind of thing that is, it's not ultimately necessarily going to win, but it's how you fight. It's how you fight. And if you are smart and you're interested in actually accomplishing something rhetorically, this and not, making arguments is how you fight.
What's genius about super straight, especially, I think, is that there isn't actually an answer to why it doesn't work, right? There's no debunking that the left can do of it on its own terms. And often I find these like, haha, I have hoist you by your own petard kind of moves, like, are sort of funny, but then they don't really quite cash out in terms of like effects. This is an act. There's no reason why super straight shouldn't be a sexual orientation if we concede the existence of like multiple genders and of attractions to various combinations of those genders, each one carving out a specific identity for its practitioners. And if we insist, as the alphabet people do, that like being attracted to men can't just mean that you're attracted to like biological men, but it means that you're attracted to all people who self-identify as men. Well, all right, then we have a special identity because this person obviously exists. It used to be called just a straight person, but this person obviously exists who is attracted to only biological men or only biological women that are of the opposite sex. Yahoo, I was just looking up Yahoo's hit piece on Super Straight, and it's a 2-sentence headline. In order to both report on it and attack it, they had to compose.
Isn't this when you know you have them, right?
Yeah, they had to compose an explainer.
Does. They have 2-sentence headlines. It's like, I'm going to explain to you how bad this is. Yeah.
Right. They have to figure out a way to editorialize on it and explain what it is. And it's such a niche, weird, kind of goofy thing that they have to do it. They need 2 sentences. So it's a social media insider trend has people identifying as super straight. First sentence. The transphobic campaign was meant to divide LGBTQ people. Second sentence, end of headline. Not even yet at the subhead. Like that is the full headline.
Defense.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So this is finally for once the left on the back foot. And then deep into the article, we have, though it's describing a preference, members of the transphobic movement claim it's a sexual orientation. Those of us who are old enough will remember the late bygone days of the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation hearings, in which overnight the term preference became an offensive thing to say about ways that people tend to fall in love, want to have sex, and so forth. Now we find, constructed so far as I know out of whole cloth, smuggled into the middle of a clause, essentially, this very distinction wielded against the super straights, that it's actually a preference. It's not really a sexual orientation. On what basis are we making this claim? We have no idea. It's just that we have to invent it in order to delegitimize this thing and diffuse its power, which, as you say, Matt, just shows that they're kind of on the back foot. They've got really nothing against this. It's kind of entertaining.
Should we lay out before James lays out some woke teaching for us? Should we just lay out why super straight works? Some people may be in such a pleasant world that they don't know the craziness going on out there. I mean, the premise of the trans movement is really that you're transphobic, and also some of the queer folks. But you're transphobic. There's no such thing as super straight. There's no such thing as actually heterosexuality. And because you can choose your own gender and they're really a man or woman, if you're not sexually attracted to a man who's cut off his genitals, right, you are transphobic. And in fact, women and men should have sex with trans people. And if they're not attracted and they don't want to, there's actually something wrong with them. And this gets very dirty and worse than this. I mean, it's almost, you want to talk about rape culture. Peachy Keenan has written on this for us. I mean, some of the trans folks say, you need to engage in activity with us to prove that you're not actually transphobic. So in the midst of that, super straight is saying, well, no, if you can all have determined identities, then heterosexual people can have determined identities. Just in case anyone's out there on their morning commute going, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, the last just coda to that, Matt, to make it simple for folks, because it is a bewildering landscape we're talking about here. Yeah, the premise is the premise of the trans community is if I say I'm a woman, even though I'm a biological male, I am a woman, and that actually applies whether or not I've had an operation removing my genitals or not. So
the phrase,
if you're a man who are attracted to women, you need to be attracted to women who identify as women, even if they're not biological women. And if you're unwilling to date them and engage in fornication with them, you're a transphobe. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, our listeners will hopefully forgive us
for
really noting that the term is genital preference. That if you have genital preference, you're transphobic, meaning that you shouldn't, who you sleep with. Right. It's wrong for that to be just about their gender.
By the way, this is the ideology that is in the schools. They're teaching your kids all this stuff. So just be aware.
Yeah. Do not send your kids to public school in most states, and certainly in private school in most states.
Yeah, I don't have much in the way of woke doctrines on this. To close us out, I see that producer Jake is rolling around on the floor of the studio with his hands over his ears crying. So I'll make it brief. I mean, just as there is a secret cost to all of the pornography, all of the just terrible, awful, bad pornography out there that people are consuming over and over again every day, this is like taking up mind share and soul share, and it comes with a real cost. And the fact that we can't go a day without, and granted, like we do this for a living for some reason, but most people are having this experience too. You can't throw a brick into society without hitting a brainworm. And the cost, the psychic and cultural cost of having to contemplate and visualize and picture and chew over and sit with and share your most intimate mental thoughts with the most aberrant and bizarre and disfigured people in the world. The cost of that is mounting by the day. I can feel it. I'm not the only one who feels it. And it's taking our eye off of the most important things that are unfolding around us, that if we don't get right, we are all going to be in terrible, terrible trouble. And instead we have to contemplate this insanity.
Isn't part of that, like, I love this thought. I mean, it's insane to me that we have this beast, right? The internet, we have the bots and the AI. And James has mentioned this before. I mean, the political import of sexuality, the psychosexual compromise we've talked about. It's like, why is it normal to think when you open the box that you use for work, right, you're going to have, this torrent of sexuality, right there, and also in your face, like they trying to pull you in, right? I had a friend the other day say, don't accept a friendship from so-and-so because they're on OnlyFans now and they're trying to, engage in their own like CIA game, or intelligence game. And I was like, I saw the invitation. I didn't accept it. It looked like a spam account, but like, that's normal to us. That's a very weird situation. And when you have this kind of, this monster, this AI, this large bot that is just like throwing out aberrant sexuality of all kinds, and then drawing you in, and then it has its own religion along with it, that ultimately the priests of the trans are the totems of. And if you're out there thinking this is a problem, you're not alone. It's very abnormal, and it really is. There's no way that such a thing exists without people who are using it for, let's say, political ends.
Yeah, that's right. We should end on that note. Jake has flashed the time thing to me 3 times. We'll take this up more. It's only going to keep aggressively rolling forward. I'll just end with I know many of us saw this on, I think it was actually from a friend or a fellow traveler of Claremont from the fellowships, but somebody was like, oh yeah, no, it wasn't a friend or fellow traveler, but we all saw it. Somebody said, well, a high school girlfriend reached out. $10 says she's going to send me an OnlyFans link soon. I haven't heard from her in forever. She's an ex-girlfriend. We have not been in touch at all. And she sent out a friendly note to me saying, hey, I was viewing your profile online, and how are you doing? What's up? And sure enough, who knows? It might be all made up, but it fits with the current zeitgeist and our trends, which Matt just illuminated. And sure enough, her next post was, well, I'm on OnlyFans now. You should check it out. Hope you're doing well, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's for our listeners who don't know what OnlyFans is, don't Google it. I'll just say it's a bespoke, customized website for subscription pornography with any random girl you may have gone to high school with, who's now has a webcam in her room and is entertaining folks for money. It's quite a place we've arrived at. So
I also have to say,
yes,
just in the last remaining negative 5 minutes.
Yeah.
OnlyFans is clearly a criminal enterprise. I mean, it's just sold for a huge sum to this like known felon who's like a Ukrainian guy. I mean, he reeks of organized crime. And the founders are a father and son investment banker team in one of the biggest banks in London. And those are the only 2 principals in the firm that owns and sold OnlyFans to this Ukrainian guy. Like, do some digging, people. I mean, GQ runs a story about how OnlyFans is like changing sexuality. Try doing an expose into who's behind OnlyFans.
Yeah.
It's so obviously it's as dirty as it could possibly get. And I'm not talking about just the porn.
Yeah. No. So PSA from us, even if sometimes you find yourself unable to resist urges and contemplate going on OnlyFans, just do it for your self-interest alone. you're probably being entrapped and recorded at some giant op. Resist. Well, thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. And if you want to learn more about all our projects and writing, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, ClaremontReviewBooks.com, and our brand new Washington, D.C. based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. Please rate, share, and subscribe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. And thank you all for listening, even for this long episode. Jake, forgive us. Talk to you all next week.